maybe if I can have the slides. So this is what I do, but so I do a lot about exponential technologies and this, and I started out at the hospital system. But I was more interested in the rise of the mobile technologies and where it brings, people to care for their own health. So I started to shift from basically this, was my thesis about 7 years ago now, to much more of a model which was at that time sort of emerging, and it was called the Quantified Self. And I don't know if I would ask you here who've heard about the Quantified Self. Who's heard about the term before? So not everybody, and that's maybe not so strange because it's something like many memes that goes by many different names, actually. I mean, there's scientists I talk to or caregivers or others that say, well, we've been collecting data for 20, 30 years. We just didn't name it that. So in that sense, it isn't new. What was new was, this happened in 2008. You'll see some people in this picture, actually, Tim Ferriss, who some of you might know from the 4-Hour Workweek, and some others gathered in Kevin Gelly's room, and Kevin was at the time the managing editor of Wired magazine. And the guy in front is Seth Roberts, and Seth was an emeritus professor of experimental psychology at Berkeley, and he was known for doing crazy experiments, like he would stand on one leg, and then he would try and find out if it would influence his sleep the next day. And because he knew a little bit about experiments and psychology, he could do those with a sort of scientific rigor applied to those experiments, because he wanted to test his hunches. So what we developed, and this has grown into a community, and I'm trying to use some shortcuts not to go into too much depth with every step here, is a community of people who want to answer 3 questions. It's like, what did you do, how did you do it, and what did you learn? So we start from the flip side. It's like, you probably had a question. Somebody explained QS at one point to me like, it's a bring your own question movement. So it's about people that have a question and want it answered. It's mostly not people that have a lot of data, it's just the reverse. It's people with a need for data, so they go on a hunt and they find the data in their own data sets, they find it in public data sets, they find it in all places where you can basically look for it. This was what Seth started doing in 2008. He had a hunch that eating butter would make him better at arithmetic. And he started testing that. And it actually turned out to be pretty true. If you even look at it with statistical tools, there's a correlation between that. Whether it's a causation, of course, is another question. There's at least a correlation. But what happened if you scroll down, this is his blog, and unfortunately Seth died way too early last year. This is what happened. People started responding on this. So people used to go into depth with him, like trying to explain what was the phenomenon that was happening. So there were people talking about, well, I think it's this type of butter, and that's an interesting idea about a certain vitamin that should or should not be in the butter, and that might be influencing your brain or your mental health, and so on. So there was a lot of talk about that, because he went on a hunch, and he then tried to gather data to prove it. Well, what was the essence of what he was doing? He said, do the smallest thing possible. So I'm trying to sort of a little bit reverse, I think, some of the things we've heard is you can do a lot of things with huge numbers of data, and then you probably have to find somebody that's interested in your answer or your correlation or causation you have. QS as a community is really interested in quite the opposite. It's like, what can I do? What do I need at all? Maybe I don't need any data. Maybe I don't need any scientific rigorous methods at all to find out what some things that I want to know more about how they work, actually. There's people, and we have a blog, and this is filled with experiments like this. So if you go to quantifiedself.com, there's people doing all kinds of experiments. People who had the diagnosis who say, like, so I get diagnosed by a physician with more of an irritated bowel syndrome, and she said, like, well, I have a hunch it's somewhat in that area, but it's maybe different, who try to set up these experiments. And I think every scientist looking at this, like, this is way too small. You can't say all these correlation causations based on this data. Well, what's really the question is, how much data do you need to go in the direction you really need to go to? So how much scientific rigor should you apply? There's another example I told to a few people. A physician from the UK with a patient with sleeping problems gave a jawbone to his patient. When he asked for medicine, he said, I'm not going to prescribe you medicine, I want to know what's going on. And the patient indeed slept for too little a time a night, 5 hours, but he didn't tell that he slept for about an hour and a half during the day, in very small sets of sleeping and lying on a couch or sitting in a chair. So QS and the data is really also about a narrative. It's about having a story that you want to tell to other people, and a lot of talk so far has been, rightfully I think also, about optimization, trying to be better. But that's not always the case that people do it for. People want to also know more, understand more, but not necessarily right away go and change something. It is a process, and it's a process that's very different for every individual in its own right. This is just a nice visualization of one of the people, Sarah Rigare, who is a Parkinson's patient in our community. The red dot actually is the amount of time she gets with her physician in a year, compared to all the time that she's not getting interaction with her physician. So she decided to go on her own sort of quest for how can I inform myself better about my illness, and she found this game in the App Store, and it allows her, she has a very specific form of Parkinson's, so she gets stiffness in her limbs, which allowed her to track how stiff her limbs were and how that inflicted her ability to go through her day as a normal person, because she takes medicine. If you scroll down, this is one of her blog posts. These are the measurements. The top ones are her husband, the bottom ones are her measurements, and the ones that are the block diagrams below are her medicine intakes. And so she can shift now her medicine based on what she's experiencing, the best time of the day, if you look at the stiffness in her limbs. And she can talk with her doctor about how she's doing that and what she's actually changing in that rhythm. There's all kinds of fun things. I can probably... This was one that I saw yesterday, which I found just to... So this is somebody doing a marriage proposal wearing a heart rate monitor. So, and this is really about the narrative. So you can see here, buying ice cream apparently got him a little bit more calmer, enjoying the ice cream, so that's a moment of calm. And here he started, what does he say? Starting using words, I think. You see it going down. So this was definitely the most moment. So starting proposing silently, starting using words, and then it goes down again. And then after a while, he sat down, found a bench, and then his heart rate dropped again to his average level. The question here, for example, could be, what's his average level? Because an average level isn't the same for, any person. So there's a lot of data and questions you can ask for just one person already. That's actually hard enough to try to answer with just very small data sets. I do it myself, so I have a weight scale, and this is my data. So I always say the data for my weight, which is now here, which is not good, which is 92, is not so much inferred about I'm not so much interested in how much this weight changes, but what you see here, these are these bubbles, and that's engagement with my weight. This is when I start running, I start to be much, much more engaged. This is what happens when I go on holiday. I become completely disengaged with my health. That's the story that I infer from this data. Not so much, I can do many more things, but this is what it's most clear for me. It doesn't matter so much what I do, I need to find a way to stay engaged in ways that fit my sort of scheme. So I probably need to start thinking, if I travel so much, what do I do during travel to keep to a certain engagement with my health? Do I bring my scale? Probably not, because it's just an average scale which doesn't fit easily in my backpack, but I need to think about that. And then I have data, which is the other way around, and this keeps slowly loading, but I can assure you that I take a picture every day at 8:36. Which is quite the opposite. I don't have a question with this data. I think I have a future question which can be helped by having this data, because I believe also not only in that I have questions right now, but this informs me about whether I'm around people. So what happens, for example, if you have a 900 people event, there's 3 nights of working, although you don't see the event, it's working, nights after night, and then this is in the pub, actually, after we ran the event. So there's all kind of inference of the data that tells something about me, and I just want to, because of time, skip ahead to one slide, because this is, by the way, the earthquake in San Francisco that woke people up with their jawbone. So all these people with jawbones woke up, and you see that back in the movement data. But there's one specific one that I like, because this is my... So the previous speaker talked about actually the data, if you look at it on a personal level. So this is my very specific personal data, where I can build a larger context out of to help me inform my decisions. So this is really from day to day. You even see where I am today. So zooming out, zooming out, zooming out. So there's my trips. So far, apparently, I've been to Spain and Portugal recently. And I can track actually where I've been, and I can, if I scroll back to where I live, which is Amsterdam, you can even go and see in depth. Like I can try and find out what is the, places, I can actually zoom in even more, the places that I go most often. So this is my home, somewhere. And you see now blue lines, which is cycling. Of course, we're a cycling city, so we do a lot of that. Running, so the purple ones is running. I can actually switch this off so you see it more clearly. So I do most of my daily activities is cycling. I can show you, this is where I live, and then it shows me where I go, the Albert Heijn, that's the Dutch supermarket that's everywhere in Amsterdam. I go to the Albert Heijn most when I go next to the home, then I, from my home, go often to the Albert Heijn. I know where I'm cycling, so I have a lot of context data that's helping me inform my decisions. So this is just my personal examples. There's a whole community that wants to start with their own questions and use whatever technology and data is available that gives them just enough answer to go and search for the next hunt. So I really like the comment this morning about big data. It's not about data, it's really about big questions and helping people answer them.